My grandmother never bought a single bottle of oven cleaner. She ran her farmhouse kitchen in the mountains of Tōno on vinegar, salt, and patience, because there was no money for anything else. I'm Mika Sato, and I've kept that same habit going for over 25 years, raising 5 children without ever hiring anyone to clean my house. The whole method costs about $5 and nothing that fumes up your kitchen or eats through the metal. It does take more scrubbing than a 15-minute spray, and there's one shiny button on your oven I want to warn you about first. Open your oven door right now and look at the bottom of it. There's likely a piece of cheese down there from the last frozen pizza you made, burnt down to a little black chip, and along the edges of every rack there's a line of grease that's gone dark and sticky. You have probably already tried to wipe that away with a rag and gotten nowhere, and that's not because you didn't scrub hard enough. Here's the thing you have to understand about that grime, because it changes how you clean it. Grease and sugar and little bits of food get heated in that oven again and again, every time you cook, until they don't just sit on the surface anymore. They caramelize, and then they carbonize, which means they turn into a hard, dark layer that's actually bonded to the metal underneath it. It's not dust sitting on a shelf. It's closer to something baked onto a pan on purpose, except nobody meant to bake it there. That's why a dry rag or a stiff brush wears out your arm and barely touches it. You're trying to scrub off something that has to be softened first, and no amount of elbow grease changes that order of operations. Water and a mild alkali need time to work down into that layer before it will let go of the metal. And that's true whether you're using a $15 bottle of spray or a spoonful of something from your own pantry. The racks make this worse, and if yours are anything like mine, you already know why. They aren't one flat surface. They're wire and edges and little turned corners, and grease finds every one of those spots and settles into it, which is exactly why a quick wipe over the top bar of a rack leaves the underside just as dark as it was before you started. Whatever method you use has to actually reach into those edges, not just pass over the parts you can see easily. The glass on your oven door tells the same story, even though it looks like a different problem. That haze you see when you shut the door and look through it isn't a smudge sitting on top of the glass. It's the same grease and steam residue, baked on in thin layers over months, which is why window cleaner alone never quite clears it. It needs the same softening treatment as the metal inside, just spread a little thinner since glass shows every streak. My mother, Yoshiko, used to say, a job like this isn't won by strength, it's won by patience, and by doing the softening step before the scrubbing step, in that order, every time. Once you accept that, the whole job gets easier, because you stop fighting the grime with your arm and start fighting it with time instead. And time, unlike a $15 bottle, is free. I want to tell you where this method really comes from, because the Japanese way can sound like a slogan on a label. My grandmother Fumiko raised me in a farmhouse in Tōno, up in the mountains of Iwate, where the winters were long and hard, and nothing got thrown away because nothing could be replaced easily. She cleaned that entire farmhouse kitchen with 3 things: vinegar, a bit of salt or baking soda, and rice bran, because that's what she had. Not because it was a trend or a philosophy she'd read about. I'm not telling you every household in Japan cleans this way. I'm telling you this is what one grandmother did, in one farmhouse, and it's the same method she passed down to my mother and then to me, and the one I still use in my own kitchen in Sendai today. I didn't learn this from a class or a book. I learned it as a girl, standing next to Fumiko while she worked, and I've used the same 3 things for over 25 years, through 5 children and 1 income, and a lot of ordinary dirty ovens. This isn't a trend. It's just how it's always been done in my family, and it still works exactly the same way it did in her farmhouse. I'll also tell you honestly that I don't wait for my oven to get this bad before I touch it. Most weeks, once things have cooled down, I wipe the inside with a damp cloth, just to catch what's loose before it has the chance to bake on, again and again. It isn't a rule I read anywhere. It's simply easier to do a little bit weekly than to fight a whole year of buildup at once, and that habit is half of why my oven never gets to the state some of yours are in right now. So when I walk you through this, understand it's not a marketing angle. It's a grandmother's method, tested for decades, and I'm going to show you every step in the exact order I do it myself. Start with the racks before you touch anything else inside the oven. Pull them out and drop them into your bathtub, or a large plastic bin if you don't have a tub free, and fill it with warm water along with 1 dishwasher tablet. The same enzymes that break down grease and food on your dinner plates will go to work on the grease coating those racks, and you can just let that soak the entire time you're cleaning the rest of the oven, which is really the whole trick to this step. You aren't spending extra time on the racks at all. You're letting the water do the work in the background while your hands are busy somewhere else. Before any cleaner touches the inside of the oven, clear out the loose stuff first. That burnt cheese, the crumbs, the little black bits on the bottom, get those out with a vacuum, a brush, or even a paper towel in your hand. If a piece is really stuck, a plastic putty knife will loosen it with one gentle scrape, and then you can vacuum it up or lift it out with a towel. Skipping this step just turns your cleaner into sludge instead of letting it reach the actual baked-on layer underneath, and you'll end up doing the whole job twice. Now, make your paste. Mix baking soda with a small amount of water until it's about the thickness of icing, and spread it over the interior surfaces, staying away from the heating element itself. If your oven is only lightly soiled, 15 to 20 minutes is enough. If it's heavily caked on, spread it thick, closer to the surface itself than a thin coat, and let it sit overnight in a cold oven. By morning, that paste will have gone a shade darker from pulling the dirt into itself, and a good amount of the grime will lift away with it. While that paste sits on the interior, spread a thinner layer over the inside of the glass door too, since it needs the same treatment, just less of it. Give it the same rest, then wipe it back to clear with a damp cloth and buff any last haze away with a dry one. Wipe the paste away with a damp cloth, and only after that, come through with a spray of plain white vinegar over the same surfaces. I'll say this plainly because I still see it done wrong constantly. Do not mix the baking soda and vinegar together before you use them. That reaction looks impressive, but all it actually makes is salt water, and salt water doesn't clean anything. Used one after the other, the baking soda does the lifting and the vinegar clears what's left behind, and you'll actually see it fizz slightly where it's catching the last bit of loose powder, which is exactly what you want it doing. Once the inside is done, go back to your racks. By now, the water should look genuinely dirty, which tells you the tablet did its job. A soft scrub sponge, the kind sold as a scrub daddy or a scour daddy, works especially well on that textured interior surface, and most of what's left will come off in 1 or 2 passes. For grease that's held on, even after soaking, fine steel wool of the very softest grade will cut through it without marking the metal. Never reach for the green or yellow scouring pads for this job. They're aggressive enough to scratch the interior surface, and I've watched that scratching turn into rust over time, which turns a $5 cleaning job into a rack you eventually have to replace. If there's still a patch of char that won't lift off the bottom of the oven, a fresh razor blade scraper will get under it. As long as you go slowly, keep the surface a little wet so the blade glides instead of digs, and never use a blade that has any rust on it, since a rusted edge is what actually causes a scratch. Once you're satisfied, do one last pass with a clean, damp towel, rinsing it out as you go so you're not just smearing residue around. Then dry everything with a microfiber cloth and put the racks and anything else you removed back where they belong. A question I get asked constantly is what to do about the heating element, since it sits right in the middle of the mess and nobody wants to damage it. The answer is simple. Lift it very gently, just enough to spray and wipe underneath it, since that's usually where the worst of the grease has been quietly pooling for months. If any cleaner lands directly on the element, a damp towel wipes it off without any harm done, and there's no need to unscrew or remove it any further than that. Some ovens have a door that unlatches and lifts straight out, which gives you a much easier angle on the bottom, and the far corners you can otherwise barely reach with your arm bent over the open door. If you've never done this before, it's worth having a second person help you the first time, since the door is heavier than it looks, and I've heard of it slipping and the glass cracking on people who rushed that step alone. Check your own manufacturer's instructions before you try it, because every model latches a little differently, and forcing a door that isn't meant to come off that way is how it gets damaged. Now here's the part I actually want you to sit with for a moment, because it's the reason I brought up that shiny button earlier. Your oven's self-clean setting looks like the easy way out. Press one button, walk away, come back to a clean oven. Except that setting works by heating the inside to somewhere between 800 to 1000 degrees to burn every bit of grease down to ash, hot enough that it releases fumes of its own into your kitchen air. That's hot enough to put real strain on the thermostat, the control board, the wiring, and the fuses, and hot enough that any grease left behind can actually catch and start a small fire inside a closed box in your kitchen. I've had an appliance repairman tell me directly that he's opened up ovens after a self-clean cycle and found a control panel gone soft and warped from the heat on a machine that worked perfectly fine the week before. There's also the smell to think about. That much heat pushes fumes out of whatever residue is baking off, strong enough that anyone in the house with sensitive lungs will notice it long before the cycle finishes. I'm not telling you this happens every single time you press that button. I'm telling you it's a real risk, one that repairman warned me about years ago. And it's a risk you take on for the sake of not having to scrub for 20 minutes. I'd rather spend the 20 minutes and still have a working control panel afterward. I want to be honest with you about the trade-off here, because I don't like promising you something that isn't quite true. This method takes real effort. It is not a 15-minute spray and walk away job, and if your oven has been neglected for a year or more, one round of baking soda and vinegar might not finish the very worst of the char in a single sitting. Sometimes you need a second pass, or a longer soak, or a few extra minutes with that razor blade scraper on one stubborn corner, and you should plan your evening around that instead of expecting to be done in one quick pass. It also won't fix a heating element that's already failing, or a rack that's warped from years of heat. And no amount of vinegar changes that. Those are jobs for a repair person, not a cleaning method. And I'd rather tell you that plainly now than have you spend an hour scrubbing at something that was never dirt to begin with. Make sure the oven is fully cool and unplugged from any concern about the element before you start too, since none of this should ever be done on a warm surface. I won't pretend the scrubbing isn't real, because that's not how I was raised to teach anything, but set that against what you're avoiding. No fumes filling your kitchen while your children are home. No worrying about a splash of harsh cleaner landing on your skin. No chance of an 800-degree cycle quietly stressing a control board that costs far more to replace than any bottle on a store shelf. The scrubbing is real, and so is what it saves you from. By the time you've done this once, start to finish, you'll know exactly how long it takes in your own kitchen. And the next time will go faster, because now you know the order that actually works, and you won't be guessing your way through it the way you were the first time. I'll be fair about the other option too, because it does exist and it isn't nonsense. A store-bought oven and grill cleaner will cut through the same grease faster, sometimes in under an hour instead of overnight. And for someone who needs the oven back in service right away, that speed is worth something. If you do go that route, spray it evenly across every interior surface, even though the bottle usually says 10 minutes is enough. Give it closer to 30 minutes to a full hour if you can, because the longer it sits, the more it emulsifies that grease before you ever have to wipe at it. But that speed comes with its own list of things to manage. You need a window open or a fan running, because those sprays are strong enough that you shouldn't be breathing them in a closed kitchen. You need gloves and something over your eyes. And if your oven has any stainless steel trim or a stainless bottom, you need to lay towels down to protect it and keep that spray off it entirely, because it will etch the metal, and etching doesn't wipe away the way grease does. When you do wipe the cleaner off, work in sections and rinse your towel often, because dragging a dirty towel back over a clean spot just puts the grime right back where you found it. Here's the whole turn of it for me. A clean oven was never about which bottle you own. My grandmother Fumiko cleaned an entire farmhouse with 3 things, and never once had a dirty oven she couldn't handle. Not because she had the right products, but because she understood what she was actually up against. That's the part I want to pass on to you more than any single recipe, more than the brand name on any bottle. I'm not against anyone who reaches for that spray. Some weeks you genuinely don't have the hour to spare on a paste that needs to sit overnight. And a working oven by dinner time matters more than which method got you there. I just don't want you thinking the spray is the only option, or the fast one, because once you know the order of steps, the slow way isn't nearly as slow as it sounds. And when you add it up, a box of baking soda, a bottle of white vinegar, and 1 dishwasher tablet run you about $5 total, and you'll have plenty of all 3 left over for the next time your oven needs this. That single bottle of specialty spray runs you more than that for one use, plus the gloves, plus the open window, plus watching the stainless steel the whole time you're wiping. $5 and some patience gets you the same clean oven, without any of that list to manage afterward. Once the racks and the door are back on, that oven looks the way it did the day it was new. And you got there for about $5 and your own 2 hands. Try this on yours this week, and come back and tell me in the comments what your oven looked like when you were done. Next time, I'll show you the same 3 things working on something even greasier, your stove.